So hello, I'm Mary Ellen Campbell. I'm the new coordinator for the LGBT Heritage Project. I have just recently taken over from Richard, and I think he's in here tonight to check up on me. No, he's been very good and he's given me lots of guidance in the last month, so he's almost welcome. The History Club, as you know, has been going from last July, and it's in conjunction with the Linen Hall Library. And we have Scott Edgar with us tonight from Linen Hall, who's also newly on post. So I'm going to pass over to Scott and then to Michael Friars, who's going to chair tonight's meeting. Scott.
Good evening, everyone. I wasn't aware that I was going to have to do any kind of introduction, so I've nothing planned here. Like Mary Ellen, I'm fairly new in this post. Some of you might be used to dealing with Jason Burke. So I'm working alongside Jason at the Linen Hall Library as an events coordinator this year, while he's focusing on centenary and partition events. And it's been very nice to meet some of you, and we're still incredibly proud to be working alongside the LGBT History Club, and we hope that continues. And like Mary Ellen said, all the past events, if you've missed any of those, you can visit our YouTube channel or look up linenhall.com and you can check out all the previous events on there.
Over to you, Michael.
Okay, thanks, Mary Ellen. Thanks, Scott. Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to welcome you all to this month's meeting of LGBT History Club. As Mary Ellen says, my name is Michael Fry. I'm one of the volunteers with the LGBT Heritage Project. And for those of you who've been to previous meetings of LGBT History Club, you'll know we cover lots of different topics. We have lots of different speakers. Very often we're covering quite academic perspectives on LGBT history, but I'm really delighted that we have tonight's speaker because he's going to be sharing a very personal story. And I would love to introduce Father Seamus Mac Ghille Aindrais, also known to his friends, he tells me, as Jim. What do you prefer, Jim or Seamus?
Jim will be fine.
Okay. So, Jim, it's great to have you with us tonight. So I met with Jim actually for the first time with Mary Ellen a couple of days ago on Zoom, and I was just explaining to him about LGBT History Club. And he said to me that, sure, my life is LGBT history. And do you know what, folks, having heard a bit from Jim about his story, I think you'll agree with me. And it's a very moving, very powerful story as well. So we're really looking forward to hear what you have to share with us, Jim. Just to give a little bit of an introduction, Jim is based in County Donegal, but he's originally from Belfast. And very shortly, he's going to be ordained as a priest in the Open Episcopal Church. And I know, Jim, you'll be talking a bit more about that journey. And the title of Jim's talk tonight is Love is Not a Sin, The Journey of Faith from My Closet. So folks, do give Jim your attention. Also, if you have any questions or comments, we'll have a bit of a discussion after Jim has finished giving his talk. But if you have any questions, any comments on what he's sharing tonight, please just feel free to put those in the chat and we can pick those up in the Q&A afterwards. And just to let you know as well, Jim, Mary Ellen has your slides. So whenever you want your photographs up, just let Mary Ellen know. But otherwise, you're really welcome and delighted to have you with us tonight at LGBT History Club.
Thanks very much. So whenever I want to slide up, I'll say roll it there, Colette, all right? The old reference back to the Late Late Show. So as Michael said, my name is Seamus Mac Ghille Aindrais. My family and friends know me as Jim. I live in County Donegal, and the first photograph there will show you the view from my front window in my house in Donegal. It's on a hill overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, and as you can see, it's quite spectacular. I should start by saying thank God today the Methodist Church in conference just agreed to allow same-sex marriage in all of their churches. So we have won another little battle. I entitled my story, Love is Not a Sin, basically because earlier this year, Pope Francis was speaking to a young same-sex couple who had children, two young men, and he wished them every blessing. And somebody who had nothing better to do then contacted the Vatican authorities to see what the truth and the teaching of the church was on this. And while it has changed from my early days, it said that homosexuality, to be born a homosexual is not your fault, but the sin is when you have a sexual relationship with another person. And I just don't agree with that. I can't agree with that. And for me, love between one man and another, between one woman and another, can never be seen to be a sin. As Michael said, I was born in Belfast. I grew up in North Belfast, and was very lucky to be born just before the Troubles began. So I didn't see much of Belfast, really, except for our street. I was one of 8 children. Attitudes to sex and sexuality were very conservative. My parents were both very religious. My father was from an evangelical Christian background in East Belfast, but had become Catholic when he married my mother. So he brought his understanding of God with him. And God was a God of wrath. He was the guy who sat on a big throne, and he looked down at this puny creation that he had made, and he judged it. And he sat with his book, making a note of all our offenses if we didn't live according to the rules and regulations and the commandments of God. And he would have quite happily kicked us down into the pit of fire if we hadn't lived a good life. So that was kind of the picture of God that I grew up with. And in my teenage years then, I went to secondary school, and I realized, obviously, that I was gay. I was attracted to other guys at school. I tried to do what research I could on homosexuality, which was very limited because, remember, in the 1970s and 80s, we had no internet. There was no social media. There was no Wikipedia to look at. So all I had were these big volumes in the Catholic Encyclopedia. And I read up that in those days, we were seen as being disordered. We had a mental and physical disorder. And basically, the only way of staying free from sin was to live a life without sex. Well, that didn't really bother me much because from a young age, I'd always felt this desire to become a priest. So I moved from secondary school into the Passionists, which is a religious order. I'd say a lot of you would know the church up in Holy Cross in Ardoyne. That's where my mother and father were married, and so we had that family relationship with the Passionists. So I went to this beautiful place outside Enniskillen called the Gran. And that's when I always tell people that I met God for the first time. And he wasn't a God. And actually, it wasn't a God of wrath. It was a God of love, a God of surprises, and not a sugar daddy God who hands out gifts to those who love him, but one who was very much part of me as I was part of God, that God was love. And I remember reading in a book years later, a book called God of Surprises by Jared W. Hughes, about the scenario of what I was brought up to believe. God was this benevolent great uncle who you used to go and see with your parents, and it was brilliant. You'd go to his house, and this uncle had all your favorite treats out on the table and all the fizzy drink you could drink, and it was fantastic. And next Sunday, your parents would say, "Do you want to go back?" And you say, "Yeah, great." And then after a while, the great uncle would gather all the kids together and say, "Come with me." And of course, he was your benevolent uncle, so you followed him. And then he took you downstairs into the basement. And as you were going down the stairs into the basement, it was getting hotter and the air was musty. And you could hear these cries in the distance. And then he threw open a big door at the end of a passageway, and all these people were being tortured and thrown into flames. And he turned and raised a finger and said, "That's what's going to happen to you if you don't come and see me every Sunday." Well, I rejected that God because that was not the God that I now espoused. He was a God of love. And from there, I moved on then to Mount Argus with the photograph you can see now. That's the Passionist House in Dublin. And I was introduced to all these new and wonderful ideas, the theology of liberation in South America. I met with Miguel de Soto, who was a government minister in Nicaragua, who had been a priest, but gave up his priesthood to fight and demand the rights of his people. And his country was being surrounded by the United States, and there was a huge embargo blocking any imports into their land. And what did he ask us for? He begged us not for money, not for arms, pencils. He wanted to teach the adults in his country to read and write, because he believed that adult literacy would change the world. And we also supported the Dunn Stores workers who refused to handle South African goods. They'd heard the words of Nelson Mandela on TV. It was a changing world. And we were people of God, but we were also going to campaign on behalf of those less fortunate than ourselves. And when President Reagan came to Ireland, we were there to boycott him and to block him. And we also then welcomed representatives from Carafriend to talk to us about homosexuality, because for many of us, it was the first time we could address the topic. And we wanted to understand it because we wanted to be able to serve our homosexual brothers and sisters. And it was during that time I did a lot of studies in scripture, church history, philosophy. And it was during that time that I came across the passage in Ezekiel that really disturbed me and made me so angry, because for a long time, homosexuals had been accused of the crime of sodomy. And that was only 1982, it was revoked. And I had been taught by my father and forefathers that the Sodom had been destroyed because of homosexuality. And then I found this passage in Ezekiel. Now, this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant. They were overfed and unconcerned. They didn't look after the poor and the needy. They were haughty and did detestable things before me, and therefore I did away with them. So we had been accused of this crime all this time, and it had nothing to do with homosexuality at all. And I'd say, yes, I'm guilty of the sin of sodomy today, because I'm living in a big house in Donegal and I'm fat and well fed, while hundreds of thousands of people are sitting on the borders of Europe trying to get in, refugees from wars that were created by the West. I get a bit passionate at times. I was at that time too that the brothers from the Taizé community came to Dublin, and they introduced me to the whole prayer around the cross and their chants. And I was very interested in their whole ethos of reconciliation, because obviously I'd grown up through the Troubles, the height of the Troubles, and family members had been murdered, and we were all affected by it. So after I'd finished my studies, then I went to novitiate, and I spent some time there with exercises deepening my faith, to try and find out exactly where I was going with life. And I read a book by Malcolm Muggeridge called Something Beautiful for God, about Mother Teresa. And she talks about her call, within her call. She basically was a teacher, and she taught the daughters of rich Indian society in a grammar school. And one year she was going on retreat and sitting on a train, and she looked out the window and saw these people living in complete and utter poverty. And she felt her call within her call to leave the convent and go and work there. And that's what she did. And that hit me very strongly. And I realized that my call within my call was to go and work for peace and reconciliation in Belfast. I left the monastery and I had to work, so I did nurse training. And during that time, the focus was on the preparation for this great plague, which was going to hit the health service, AIDS. We were expecting thousands of young men to be brought into the hospitals. They were planning to set up complete wards and wings of hospitals to deal with victims of this plague. But luckily enough, we did have the plague, but it didn't hit the way the authorities expected it to. Nevertheless, large cities like London and New York were devastated. And if anybody has seen that recent series, It's a Sin, it brought that all back to me, that time, when young people were just dropping like flies. I didn't really find a peace group to join. And again, in those days, there was no internet, so I couldn't just Google peace groups in Northern Ireland and see if I could join somebody. So I became friends with my local curate, who was from the area in North Belfast I grew up in. And he said, why don't you become a diocesan priest and you can work for peace at that? So I applied and got in, and I have to admit, I just didn't fit in there at all. The ethos was completely different than anything I expected. And the other students persuaded me, look, give it a go, see how it goes. And I did a couple of years. And that's when I met Kevin. It's funny, actually, we weren't even friends. We didn't even mix in the same circles. Maybe occasionally a crowd of us would go out for a Chinese and a few drinks, but something horrible had happened to one of our pals' sisters, and he was telling us about the way the Royal Victoria Hospital had looked after her and her family. And a lot of us had been planning to go interrailing that summer. So we decided, look, we'll do a sponsored walk or something to raise funds for the hospital. And we decided to go for a walk, a sponsored walk around France. So we walked from Cherbourg to Lourdes, and then from Lourdes to Taizé, and then back to Cherbourg again. And at the beginning, there were about 8 or 9 of us wanting to go, but it ended up, it was just me and Kevin. and we became extremely close, and we fell in love. We knew that it was impossible to be in love because of our faith, and we did fight it, and we became great friends and almost like brothers, but we wouldn't allow the relationship to continue. And we were both interested in cross-community work, and we were both invited to attend a gathering of Christians from Netherlands who had come to Ben Burb to celebrate 1500 years since St. Willebrod had brought Christianity to Amsterdam. And we were very much engaged with that group. And from that was born the Solace Community of Reconciliation. We met with Protestants from all around all around Belfast and the north, and we set up a group. We bought a house, and there were 6 of us living in the house. We'd meet for prayer every morning, and then we had a wider community of families and individuals who worked along with us, bringing together people from both sides of the community. It was at the top of the Limestone Road in North Belfast. We used our contacts through the Willebrod group to develop a cross-community youth group, and the young people had exchanged visits with a group from Amsterdam. So I always had held on to that experience of the Taizé prayer in Christchurch, and I'd read more about their philosophy and the outlook of the community. So we kind of based ourselves on that, and we visited the Taizé community regularly. And then next photograph, Kevin decided to leave me for Jesus, and I'd talked that much about my time in the monastery that he had to have a go at it. And shortly after that photograph was taken, his father died very suddenly, and he found himself having a crisis of faith, and he left. And around about the same time, people were moving on with their lives from the Solace House community. It dissolved. I found myself living in a big house on my own, and Kevin returned just as I was selling the house. And I was still involved in cross-community groups, would travel to Africa and America with them, preaching reconciliation. But I found myself coming back from New York one time, and Kevin had the brochure for the shop across the street from us. So we bought the shop and called it Kevin's, and we were able then to continue working and serving both sides of the local community. And it actually became a bit of a popular landmark in North Belfast. We still focused on our community work as much as we could, but the shop left us very little time. And I'd always dreamed of having a place in the country, and we bought a little place in Donegal, and that's why I'm here today. Around about the time we had the shop, there was an Anglican minister called Jonathan Blick. He had been a priest for over 10 years at that stage, and he became increasingly unsettled by the way the church was operating. You had to go through so much red tape to get married or have your children baptized. And the same-sex community were just totally banned. And he decided to hand in his papers to the Anglican Communion, and he became an independent priest. And he offered his ministry to everyone throughout Britain, traveled widely, marrying, baptizing, irrespective of race, creed, or sexuality. And he was performing same-sex marriage since the mid-90s, Christian marriage. After a few years, he wrote a book telling about his experiences, and he called it, "For God's Sake, Don't Go to Church." And shortly after it was published, he was contacted by a lesbian girl who had always felt a deep call to serve God as a priest, but she had been rejected constantly by her church because of her sexuality. And Jonathan began to wonder if anyone else had had similar experiences to her, or if they felt the same way as himself. So he published an ad in the Church Times inviting people to a conference, and over 100 people showed up. And one of them was Richard Palmer, a bishop of the old Catholic tradition. So eventually the group evolved into what became known now as the Open Episcopal Church. And we have priests and communities throughout England, Scotland, and Wales. So while he was doing that, Kevin and I continued working in the shop until we had to close it virtually overnight because an incident happened. Loyalist paramilitaries were killing innocent people. And cut the long story short, we were visited by a man with a gun one night, and we just happened to both be behind the counter that evening when normally we would take it in turns. And there was a crowd in the shop all standing talking to us, and the guy obviously changed his mind, jumped into a car, and sped away. So we closed the shop the next day. And a few years later, we moved to Donegal, where I became a rural bank manager, and Kev worked as an airline cabin crew in Belfast International Airport. We had a fantastic life together. It was filled with lots of laughs and adventures, and lots of people had suspicions about our sexuality because we had been housemates for 20 years. I remember visiting his sister's house one time. Her youngest, Shay, is my godson, and he came out with the statement, "Gay means being happy, or it's a lifestyle choice." And Kev and I both kind of smiled and looked at each other. Obviously, the older kids had brought up the subject, and the father was trying to explain to them. And Kay, my sister, who's here, and she's told us later, that her kids, as they grew older, used to say, "Is my Uncle Jim gay?" And she'd say, "Look, he hasn't told me yet, but until he does, it's none of our business." But secretly, they told me they used to call us Uncle Jim and Auntie Kevin. Finally, in my early 40s, after lots of study of these 6 passages in Scripture which held us back, I began to realize that God doesn't care about our sexuality. God cares about love. Men care about sexuality. Men impose the rules on sexuality. So we both decided to come out of the closet, and we settled down as an old gay couple with plenty of wine. But the call to priesthood kept coming back to me every so often, and we used to discuss it a lot, but I couldn't see it happening because I was a gay man with a loving partner, and it just wasn't going to work. And we were here to vote yes in the same-sex marriage referendum in 2015, because we believed that the church's teaching on marriage belonged to another time. It almost belongs to like the 4th century. It's very archaic, and its focus is on procreation. But the world is now overpopulated. So do we need to keep focusing only on procreation? Then in 2016, Kev went to Lisbon to take care of his mum. She had terminal cancer. And he himself became gravely ill and was hospitalized while I was working here in Donegal. And I got a call one day to rush down, and the doctor gave him 48 hours to live. But after a lot of prayer, I got onto his social media account and contacted all his friends from around the world. He made a miraculous recovery, and he lived for another year. The following May, our old dog, Molly, died. And then his mum passed away within about a week. And then Kev died 3 months afterwards in September. And he died suddenly and alone here in Donegal. I had gone to look after both of them in Lisbon, where his mum lived, and had taken up a part-time job when he started to recover. So I was still working in Belfast a couple of days a week, and I'd left him here and went to work. And when I rang the next day, I couldn't get in touch with him, and he was gone. And my world collapsed. I felt like a man in a boat without a rudder. I was just floating aimlessly from place to place. It was the most horrible time of my life. And I didn't know how I was going to get over this. But we had always planned to do the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. For those of you who don't know anything about it, you should watch the movie The Way with James Nesbitt and Martin Sheen. It's absolutely fantastic. And it'll give you a very good idea of what it's like. So I decided that I would do the Camino and carry Kevin with me in my heart. And it was the most wonderful experience of my life. I cried many healing tears. And along the road, I found that I had this desire to become a priest again. And if I could become a priest, I would spend some time every year wandering as a wandering preacher along the Camino, looking after the spiritual needs of the pilgrims. And I still had 400 kilometers to do, which should have happened last year in spring 2020, but then COVID hit. So I was stuck here in Donegal, and I was praying deeply. And I decided that I would apply for priesthood again. And I did contact the Catholic Vocation Center in Maynooth and actually had a positive response. I was very open about myself, my sexuality, and my relationship with my late partner. And I was advised to contact various vocations directors in surrounding dioceses. So I wrote off about 8 or 9 emails to them, and I had 3 replies, which came very slowly, and all rejections, and the others didn't even bother responding. But I had researched the Open Episcopal Church at the time, and I'd met up with a Spanish priest of the church in one of the Facebook LGBT groups, and I liked a lot of what he had to say. So I did my own research into the church, and it just felt like it was like fitting a glove. It was just perfect, because our belief is no one is excluded from the Lord's table. And I've always believed that. In 1983, my sister left a very horrible marriage and was divorced, and the priest told her that she wouldn't be able to receive the sacrament I was absolutely raging. I've always believed that the table is there for anyone who wants to come. So I wrote off to the Archbishop, Jonathan, and he responded to my email within minutes. And we spoke up about everything the following day on Skype. And he invited me to begin the application process. And early this year, the College of Bishops approved my ordination. And because of COVID, we couldn't do it. So I chose September this year for ordination day. September the 12th will actually be the 4th anniversary of Kevin's death. And I thought it would be nice to mark that date now as a celebration rather than a time of mourning. And I wanted a time where I could celebrate it with my family and friends. So we're hoping that we can have the ordination in St. Joseph's Old Church in Sailortown. It's a deconsecrated church, but it actually was the church that my ancestors prayed in. I know there are many gay priests north and south and ministers, but I will be ordained into a communion which is totally open and affirming as an openly gay man. And I will be able to minister same-sex marriage, and I will be able to minister all of the sacraments to the LGBT community. I'd like to hope to spread the church throughout Ireland. I'm working on that already. And some people, be careful, Michael Fryer and others, because you may find yourselves being recruited. I know Kevin's going to be with me in that work. He never wanted to be a vicar's wife, but I know he'll be with me and keep my boat pointed in the right direction. And he was always very good when I took flights of fancy to bring my feet back to the ground. And I know that he'll be holding my feet very fast and bringing me back down to reality whenever I do tend to fly off. So that's basically my story. As I said, it's a story that happened through the evolution of the change in law and attitudes of society towards us as gay and lesbian and bisexual and transgender people. And we, as I said, I celebrate today because we have made another step with the Methodist Church. I'm praying that the Presbyterian Church in Ireland will be the next, because I've been speaking to Ian Carton, the minister there, who resigned because of the church's attitude towards LGBTIA people, and to Steve Smerl in Dublin, who was called an unrepentant fornicator by his minister, because he has a loving relationship with a man. These days, those days are gone. We are living in a new world, in a new attitude. We have education now. We can look at those 6 passages of scripture and we can see that they have no basis whatsoever. We are proud people, and we will continue to serve God as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and everybody else. That's me. I'll open it up to questions now.
Thanks so much, Jim. You know, it's such a privilege to hear anyone's story, but especially the honesty and the integrity that you brought to telling your story tonight, and the journey that you've been on. We're just so grateful for you sharing that with us tonight. So thank you so much. Is there anything in terms of what Jim has shared tonight, that you have any questions about or comments? As Jim says, he's quite happy to engage in discussion with any of you, if anyone wants to ask him anything or comment on anything tonight. Well, in that case, then I'll maybe start off just by asking you a question, Jim, if that's all right.
Sure, I will.
It sounds like from pretty early on, you have never really found there to be a conflict between your faith and your sexuality. Would that be true to say? It sounds like you've been, you've never really felt the kind of shame that people so often describe who are people of faith but also LGBT. Has that, do you think that's been mostly your experience?
I'd say, to be honest with you, because as a young guy, I always had this desire to become a priest, that the church's response to me being homosexual was that I should remain celibate, and priests in the Catholic Church were celibate anyway, so it wasn't going to prove to be a huge problem. But yes, there was the shame and the embarrassment and the feeling of, I suppose, of being excluded by society, especially in our wonderful country, where, like, let's face it, 20 years before I was born, people had pink triangles sewn to their coats, and they were put in concentration camps and thrown into gas chambers. So that was very much the attitude in Northern Ireland when I was growing up. People would rather kill us, I felt. So there was shame and embarrassment and a feeling that I was inadequate as a human being. But as I said, the church's response was, don't have sex. And as I wanted to be a priest in the church, that worked out well.
Nigel, you have your hand up. Would you like to ask Jim something or make a comment?
I didn't. Can you hear me?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
It's Nigel, by the way, not Nigel. Maybe I just misheard you.
No, I did say, yeah, Nigel.
Oh, well, that's okay. Yeah, it's just a mic issue. That's okay. Seamus, I'm very sorry. I came in at the last few minutes. So, what do you call it? Your life story. Can you start over, please? I'm joking, of course. I didn't get most of it, but I do want to ask you a generic question. Whenever you were going through the realization of you knew who you were and you also knew what you wanted to do, because you were very heavily challenged, what was the worst of it?
What was the worst? Well, obviously, being homosexual, you still have your attractions to people. So there was obviously, I had chosen this life, which was celibate, but I still was a sexual person. Like, I went to pubs in Dublin with guys dressed up like Boy George, etc., and I hadn't a clue where I was. I was so naive in those days. But I was attracted sexually to people, but I knew that I could not do anything, because of the life I had chosen. And it took years for me to realize that not only does God not hate me for being homosexual, for being a homosexual, God doesn't give a shit. God doesn't give a damn whether I'm homosexual or not. That's the thing. Men make the rules. Men impose the attitudes to homosexuality, LGBTIA, the law. God is not interested in our sexuality. God just loves us.
Thank you for
Thank
that.
you. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel, for asking that. Thanks, Jim. A question from Jude, who's one of our volunteers. Jude, do you want to ask this in person?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Michael. That was a really lovely talk. I was just wondering what you thought about navigating the perceived divide between faith and LGBT issues. I'm quite lucky in that I have a number of friends who are LGBT and have faith, and then I have a number of friends who have faith and are real allies, sort of unknowingly. I'm just wondering if you have sort of any tips for people, because what I really don't like seeing is a sort of them and us. I mean, obviously we're brilliant at that in this country, but I think with LGBT issues and faith, we can do without that. So any ideas about navigating that?
Join the Open Episcopal Church. No, seriously though, my attitude has changed completely. As I said, as I evolved and my understanding of my sexuality and my faith in God grew, it changed completely. And I know, you know, like, I know what it's like out there. I'm now involved online this last year with so many LGBTIA groups on Facebook, social media, and God loves some people the way they're being treated by church groups. It's absolutely ridiculous, and that's happening in our country but mostly in America. God love them, one thing I will say to people is, if you're in the closet and you're happy there, that's okay. There is no pressure on people to come out. You must feel free to do and make steps when you are right. But just be aware that you are special. And that's the important thing. You are special. And it doesn't matter who you love. I don't think God doesn't give a damn about who you love. He loves you. And that's the important thing. And I don't know if the churches do bring that out enough. That we as a people, I've spent most of my life living in one community in Northern Ireland. I tried from my 20s, I suppose half my life, to live in the middle on the fence and to work from both sides. Some used to laugh and say that, you know, I was more Protestant than Catholic, but the one message, if I can get it across to anybody, is you are loved, you are special, and God doesn't care who you love. I don't know if that answered your question, Jude.
Thanks, Jude, for that question, and to you as well, Jim, for your answer. Nigel, you have your hand up again. Did you want to come in on that question?
I just wanted to praise Seamus, actually, and I wish I had been here on time to get the full story, because it's really important for me to seek out to these things. I don't mind disclosing to you all, especially on this live recording, I'm not a person of faith. I'm an atheist. And the reason why I sought you out, Seamus, is because I just wanted to find your story. And your story is very, very relevant, as much as it is important, because it is to do entirely with your journey and your humanity. And it was only because of me seeking you out in the first place, granted I got it late. By the way, I wanted to ask you about that. Michael, is this going to be recorded and broadcast where?
It's going to be on the Linenhall Library's YouTube channel, so it will be uploaded there, so you'll be able to catch up.
That's fantastic, because it, hold on one second. Thank you. And I'm such a chatterbox, and I croak up quite a lot. This was really important for me to find you, Seamus, because before you, I had found out Richard O'Leary's presentation on the Lesser Spotted Queer Protestant. And thanks to that, I got much more informed about the LGBT history that happened in Ulster beforehand, and a chat and a chance to ask a question to someone who was calling all the way from America, a friend of Richard's. And that was really, really good. So besides that, thanks very much for just talking about what was not pretty, but nonetheless important.
Thank you, Nigel.
Thanks,
and
Nigel.
if you're in Belfast on the 12th of September, St. Joseph's Old Church in Sailortown, come. It's at 1 o'clock. I welcome you all, everybody, because it's you'll see it's an open house. Some of the other we have one other Irish priest. He's in the south of England, and he's coming over with the Archbishop for the ceremony. But I'd like to make it a day for our community as much. It's a land break moment for Ireland, because I will be the first openly gay man to be ordained a priest, and I will celebrate that on the day.
Nuala, you have your hand up. Do you want to ask a question or make a comment?
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I know Jim. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Nuala.
And I'm here tonight because I know Jim, to support him. And there was one thing you said there, or that I picked up from what you said, Jim, in response to somebody talking. And it's this, I grew up in Northern Ireland as well, but I live in Southern Ireland. And like Jim, I spent a long part of my life in religious life, but left because I discovered my sexuality while in religious life. And it wasn't so easy to be celibate anymore when I liked women. So I made the choice to leave. And also I didn't agree with what the church was saying either. And I was struggling with it for so long. But one thing you said, or that I picked up from what was said tonight, and it's something that when I was growing up, or when people said to me, how come you didn't know you were gay when you were a kid? And when I look back on it, I would say, maybe looking back, I can see landmarks like along the way. But in Ireland, and I don't know if you agree with me, in Northern Ireland, you were either Catholic or Protestant. You certainly couldn't be gay or straight. That was even on the agenda. But also, and it's a novel thing to think that you actually could change your church if it doesn't meet your needs. And that's what I heard you say there, Jim, earlier, was come to the Open Episcopal Church if you're struggling to find people of faith, and you can be open about your sexuality in a place. And that's refreshing, and it's new to hear, I think, as somebody from Northern Ireland. Change your church. Who says you have to stay in the one church all the time? They're all under the Christian Episcopal banner. They're all, within that sort of, if that's your thing. I think I've sort of moved on from the Episcopal, the bishop sort of the structure or whatever for me, and my faith has gone more into an energy realm. But I think it's novel to hear that tonight, and thank you for that, Jim, and thanks for your talk, and well done.
Thanks, Noel.
Just to pick up on some more comments in the chat. So Kathleen Bradley says, Jim, thank you very much for being here tonight and for telling your story. I'm so glad that I was able to be here and hear the message, and you are right, love is not a sin. And Karen McShane is asking, Jim, was it St. Joseph's in Baldoyle that you studied in Dublin? Karen, do you want to elaborate on that a bit?
Not really. I saw the picture of the church, but I didn't catch the name, Jim.
Oh, that's
and I did have an uncle who studied at St. Joseph's, and I'm wondering if it was the same place.
No, that's Mount Argus Church in Dublin. It's kind of like the mother house for the Passionist congregation. But I actually studied in an institute, which closed now, but it was the Milltown Institute. And it was run by the Jesuits, and I suppose that's where I got introduced to my liberation theology and things. My attitude started to change.
Thanks for that clarification, Jim. Thank you, and I enjoyed your talk tonight.
Thanks, Karen. Richard O'Leary has his hand up. Richard, would you like to ask something or make a comment?
Yes, thanks very much, Jim. It's a very moving personal account, and it's nice also to hear someone present a kind of a rounder account of their lives, because sometimes in the context of LGBT history, we feel obliged to just talk about, say, a gay trajectory in our lives, but of course all our lives are multifaceted because there are all the dimensions to our lives, and it's nice for them to be put together. I just wanted to ask you about, you mentioned when you, I think at the time you were in Dublin with the Passionists, having some contact with Cara Friend, and was that when you came back to Belfast, and can you remember who it was in Cara Friend that you had contact with?
Oh no. It was something that I was involved in with the student body organization, and someone suggested that we contact a gay. It was just a gay group in those days, but I wouldn't have a clue who we spoke to or who came to speak to us. I think they were representatives though in Dublin rather than Belfast. But it was
make more sense.
It was extremely enlightening, you know. But as I said, you know, without social media, without the internet, we were all kind of lost. And it was nice to actually sit down and talk about it with people, and you know, to actually ask, how do you know if you're gay? Silly things, you know. What would an 18-year-old know? How? Because you couldn't ask your parents, you couldn't ask your friends, you didn't know. And especially in Belfast, like you got your head kicked in if you'd even approached the subject. Simple thing like just to know, how do you know you're gay? You know, so it was very enlightening. I'm thankful that we had that opportunity.
Kim, would you like to ask a question? Kim, you need to unmute.
You're still on mute.
Oh, great. No. Kim, do you want us to come back to you? Yeah, we'll come back to you, Kim. Nigel asks, are you a Protestant gay or a Catholic gay?
That wasn't meant to be a question. That was just meant to be in the context. Troll. That was just
very good.
A Christian gay, Jim.
Actually, when Nuala was talking there about Protestant or Catholic, that I was actually going to make that quip myself. So thanks, Nigel. You caught me. Because it was in my head. Are you a Catholic gay or a Protestant gay?
Kim, have you got your mute sorted? The struggle is over.
I think so. I think it's my iPad mini is starting to show its age now. So Jim, thank you very much for what you shared. Really appreciated your story, and very, very powerful story. I suppose my question is, you mentioned about the vote in Ireland, in the Republic, and I just wondered whether you felt there had been a greater acceptance now of the LGBT plus community as a result of that. And I suppose secondly, do you feel it has moved the churches more towards acceptance or to become more hardline as a result of the vote? I suspect I might know the answer, but I would be really interested in your perspective on it.
I know, all I know is the recent events have shown that certainly most of the Irish churches are still very much entrenched in anti-LGBTIA, and that's, as I say, I condemn that. The vote was, if you like, was a tidal wave in Ireland. because what you had for the first time was these, you had little grannies. I live in Donegal. It's the most conservative Catholic area in the state. It's the only county that voted against abortion. All the rest of the country voted for abortion in the referendum, but Donegal voted yes for same-sex marriage because grannies, grandas, mums, dads, brothers, sisters were all starting to learn that they had relatives who were gay, and they didn't want them to be treated like second-class citizens anymore. So they went out. We had really good campaigns, and they were positive. We had church groups who were out saying the rosary and things like that, but they were having a negative effect to their own story. The campaign for same-sex marriage was powerful, and the country has changed completely. Like even in Letterkenny at the weekend, I went shopping with my sister, and the number of pride flags around Letterkenny was astounding. You wouldn't have seen that 20 years ago. They'd have been burnt. The people putting them up would probably have been burnt as well. So Ireland has changed greatly. Northern Ireland will be a tougher ticket. It's because of who we are. It's my parents, my father's background of that strict evangelical biblical thing. You know, and really there are 6 passages in Scripture, and they are all questionable, especially Sodom and Gomorrah. I was so angry when I was a kid to learn that we've been called sodomites for so long, and it had nothing to do with homosexuality, as is God said in Ezekiel.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kim. And I should mention, because there will be people in this room who will not forgive me, I need to mention Spectrum, which some of the people who are here tonight attend, which is an LGBT Christian fellowship based in Belfast. Has been going over the past few years and meets monthly. So if you want to find more information about that group, they can signpost you to Affirming Churches in Northern Ireland, and you can find more about them on Facebook. Any other questions or comments for Jim? Can I maybe, oh yeah, Richard, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, it reminds me because the subject of tonight's talk has been about faith, to remind any viewers of this YouTube that, of course, in Northern Ireland in 1976, we had the foundation of the Northern Ireland Council for Religion and Homosexuality, which also known as the Gay Christian Fellowship, which continued into the 1990s. So there actually is a long history of LGBT and pro-LGBT faith activism in Ireland, in Belfast and in Dublin, which might surprise people. So on the one hand, it being you know, society with high religious adherence and conservatism, the other side of that is actually that the faith pro-LGBT movement actually has an older history here than people might realize. I've written and spoken about that in the past, but that's not that widely known, that it goes back to at least 1976.
That's excellent. That should be known more. It would be good to hear more about that at some stage, Richard, too.
Jude is asking about what you think, Jim, about how we best deal with the debate about conversion therapy. I don't know if you've been able to follow much of that.
Yeah, conversion therapy should be made illegal. Yeah, it has nothing to do with faith. Again, It is about men controlling sexuality. It has nothing to do with faith in God, and it is nothing to take away anybody's right to worship God. Conversion therapy is horrible and should be criminalized. I hope that's okay, Jude.
No, definitely. Jim, Kim, do you have your hand up still? Did you want to ask another question? No, you're okay. Okay, thanks. Jim, can I maybe ask a question? I mean, one thing that came through really strongly in terms of your story, your journey, is the commitment you have to social justice. And you talked about how you engaged with liberation theology very early on in your studies. And then even in terms of setting up Solace with Kevin in North Belfast. And I just wondered, do you think there's something that you bring to that work that's particularly connected with your being a gay man and a person of faith? Do you think your sexuality informs that commitment to social justice and reconciliation?
I don't know, to be honest with you. Mary Ellen would know my family history background as much as I do. And she'd know, like, let me give you an example. Like my great grandmother had 3 daughters, and she brought them up with deep faith, but also a deep care for people. So much so that one of our great aunts found a young girl lying in the street in Belfast. She'd been thrown out of the house because she had become pregnant, and she was a single girl, and her father kicked her out of the house. And our great aunt took that girl home and looked after her and she lived with her after she had the baby. So I suppose, I don't know if I had my focus is only because of my sexuality. I think it's based very much in my genes, and it's where that came from my grandmother's family, and also by growing up in Northern Ireland and growing up in North Belfast and watching us tearing our society apart. I either had to join in on my side or try to stop it and bring us together, because we have the most wonderful country. We have the most wonderful people. But once you start on those party lines, God, do we get our hackles up and we end up in a mess.
Just being treated as an enemy in the process.
Yeah.
It's not an easy call.
No, it's not. I know that I said to both Michael and Mary Ellen, like, I expect to be getting a lot of flack about this, but I've got a very strong back and strong shoulders, so I don't care. I did when I was younger. I didn't want to have a pink triangle stuck on my coat. I didn't want to end up in a concentration camp. I'm going to be 60 in a few years' time. And you know something? I don't care. But if I can stop it happening to any young people, if I can give them some sort of affirmation that who they are and who they love is not a sin, then I feel that even if it's only a few years, I can have served my God better than ever.
Jim, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
2 points. One, you talked about living up in North Belfast, and you'd commented that you hit the paragraph around sodomy. Kind of made me think of Terry Nellis.
Yeah.
Who was also from Newington. I don't know if you knew Terry.
That's right, yeah. He grew up around the corner from me.
That's right. In his famous Save Ulster from Sodomy t-shirts. I just, that had come into my head, so I kind of, in my head, I was thinking, like, not only were you not the only gay in the village in terms of Newington, but you're definitely not the only gay in the family. So I'll just throw that out. But my thoughts was, when you were talking about yourself and Kevin voting in the referendum for equal marriage in the 26 counties, and you also talked about the decriminalisation in here in the north. In the last kind of 30 years, we have made a lot of strides towards in the struggle for equality for our community. There's a lot more to happen. I mean, Jude mentioned conversion therapy. I think that's a big thing that we all need to get together to stop. It damages people in ways that most people won't get. I think it's very, very, very scary practice. But I'm just thinking that because of your own social kind of background, did you campaign? Did you get involved in any of the campaigns?
For the gay marriage, etc.
Yes.
Now, if I'm honest, Kevin and I lived a very quiet life. We didn't really mix in the scene, if you like. We kept our sexuality to ourselves. Occasionally people asked us, and I told you what my response usually was. It was usually something quite rude, a question to them, because my attitude to my sexuality is that it does not define me as a person. My sexuality is a part of me, but it doesn't define me. I am Seamus Mac Ghille Aindrais. I am me because of that little granny in Moffat Street who taught me values. I have an attitude to life because of the people who surrounded me. When the marriage debate was going on, Kev and I did get involved in discussions here. But if you show that first photograph, you'll see I live in the middle of nowhere. But anybody who knew us as friends and neighbors, so that's basically everybody around here, knew we were a gay couple by that stage. And so many commented to us and said, we voted for you boys. So we knew that we didn't need to, if you like, campaign the way they did in the cities. We just needed to be us.
Yeah.
Our community supported us and voted yes for gay marriage because they knew us. Sad thing is that gay marriage, we were planning to have a civil partnership in Lisbon. When we went to arrange his mother's, when we went to get her death certificate, we spoke to the registrar in Lisbon, and the sad thing was that we could never have got married in Northern Ireland, and that really upset me because I am being ordained a priest. I live most of my time in Donegal, but I want to be ordained in Belfast because that's where my people are, and I want to celebrate with you and my family. And the same, we were going to have a civil partnership, but we wanted to have it with family. And sadly, we were never going to be allowed to be married. Thank God we can now, but not in his lifetime. So I think I've eaten up all the time, Michael, have I?
Well, we're really coming towards the end of the session. Does anybody have any final burning questions for Jim, or anything you want to say just as we come to the end of the meeting?
I just wanted to thank you, Jim, for sharing your story. It's very powerful, very moving, as Kim was already said, and we do appreciate what you've said tonight and the vulnerability that you've showed as well. I'm part of a small group of people who organise Spectrum, which is a once a month online Christian fellowship for LGBT folks and their straight allies. You're more than welcome to come to that at any stage, and I'm sure there'll be an invitation coming out to you shortly, maybe to share more of your story or something more specific that you're interested in terms of social justice and what have you. So thank you again for that, and thanks to the club for organising this for us.
Thank you, Bev. Yeah, Michael has already spoken to me about Spectrum.
Excellent.
I do intend to build a community of the Open Episcopal Church in Belfast, so I'm going to be there quite a lot, and I hope to meet any of you who are there. If we can set up a place which is our church, then wouldn't it be great? The first gay church in Belfast. Yeah.
That would be something.
I'd go there.
There you go.
Yeah. So, well, I have a website. It's very easy to remember. It's ioec.ie. The Irish Open Episcopal Church.ie. ioec.ie. The email address is on that. It's info@Irish Open Church, but you'll find that on the website. It'll give you a bit more information about the Open Episcopal Church. Obviously, I'm going to be the first, if you like, of many who I think we will spread this throughout the land. God will turn no one away from the altar of God ever again. There is no rules. We turn no one away, no matter what. Whether you're into tapping, Nuala, we turn no one away.
Trish, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just quickly, when you get your wee blessing on the 12th of September, where are you going to be basically sort of ministering from? Are you planning to sort of be mainly in Donegal?
No, I intend to root myself here, because the one thing I learned from Solace was I burnt myself out, and it had always been a dream to have a place like this in Donegal. So this I would see as a place for people to come, and we'll organize events and things like that. I've got a 5-bedroom house here, so I can host about 8 people. I run a wee B&B out of it at the moment. What's going to happen in Belfast, that's up to God. I'm hoping that maybe, I don't know if it'll work out, but I'm hoping with talking with Terry from St. Joe's that I might be able to organize something there. She's in the process of building a community hub in the old St. Joe's Church, and it's very early days there, but if she can get the funding to get, or what would be even nicer if we did one of these, that DIY big build program, if we did something like that in Belfast to get St. Joe's finished, then we could have our centre, etc. But let's get rid of COVID first, and let's get me ordained, and then we can focus on that. But thanks very much for your question. It's been lovely to meet you all. Thank you. It's been very affirming, and I'm delighted that I answered the call, Mary Ellen.
Well, can I just take this opportunity to thank you all for attending the meeting tonight, but again, just especially to thank Jim for sharing his story with us tonight. We've been so privileged, so maybe we can show appreciation. So what I'm going to do now is pass back to Mary Ellen. And Mary Ellen, you have some information about the next meeting of the LGBT History Club.
I do indeed. Jim, thank you very much. Really enjoyed that. And even if I did hit you with a wee curveball at the end, but sure, what other cousins for?
Yeah.
And thank you to everybody for tuning in tonight. I'm going to stop the recording shortly, but I think that normally we stay on for a wee bit afterwards. Is that right, Richard, Michael? If people want to.
We want to. You don't have to stay, folks.
But just to give us another bit of chance to chat. I found it very interesting tonight, Jim. I hope everybody else did. So thank you very much for that. Next month we have Eilish, one of our heritage volunteers, is going to give us a wee talk on the history of Pride in Northern Ireland. So that's on Tuesday the 27th of July. And again, if anybody's interested, drop me a wee email. We'll be putting stuff up on Facebook and through social media. But even if you just want to hear anything about what we do, give us a wee shout through our social media, which is all at LGBT History NI. Have I got that right, Richard? Michael, yes. Get used to this. But thanks very much, and I'm going to knock the recording off.